Welcome to the brownstone, where logic triumphs and tempers occasionally flare. Tell us where in the world you're listening. Wolfe may never leave home, but his stories travel well. Subscribe for more mysteries with Nero Wolfe and Archie Goodwin. Every good mystery deserves good company, and a little gratitude between cases. A warm thank you to Norma, our newest patron. Your support keeps the orchids blooming and the mysteries alive. Join the circle of mystery lovers on Patreon. Link in description. Nero Wolfe and the debt Archie couldn't pay. The trouble started the moment a stranger knew my name, and I hadn't given it to him. In my line of work, that usually means either I'm getting tailed, subpoenaed, or invited to dinner by somebody's wife who doesn't know she's married. That afternoon, I was just trying to make it back from Midtown with a packet of photostats for Wolfe before the snow turned to slush. The wind had a Wall Street edge, sharp, fast, and cold enough to slice the polish off a shoe. I'd just stepped out of the registry building on Pine, collar up, hat brim down, when he appeared. Tallish, camel hair coat, hat angled too precisely, like a man who wanted to be remembered but not recognized. He moved straight toward me with the briskness of somebody late for Judgment Day. "Mr. Goodwin?" he asked. I gave him a once-over that could have shaved him cleaner than his barber. "Depends who's asking. You with the Photostat Appreciation Society?" He didn't smile. His eyes were grey, jittering, and his voice came out low and urgent. "For Wolfe," he said. "Tell him, the ledger's due." Then he pressed something into my hand. The envelope was thick and warm, like it had been gripped tight for a while. Before I could say more, he stepped off the curb, head turning toward the street as if expecting someone. He didn't see the cab. It came fast, horn blaring too late, and by the time it stopped half a block down, he was face down on the asphalt, his camel coat spread out like a broken flag. A few people screamed. A cop whistled. The cab kept going. The man's hat rolled to the gutter. I kneeled beside him, but his eyes were already empty. A clerk with more enthusiasm than pulse ran for an ambulance, but I knew better. I'd seen that look before, the permanent kind of calm. When I glanced down, I saw he'd torn something as he fell. A slip of paper, half protruding from his glove, jagged edge where it had been ripped clean. I pocketed it with the envelope before the crowd closed in. By the time the uniforms showed up, I was just another bystander explaining how the cabbie had vanished into traffic. They took my name, and I didn't mention the envelope. I wasn't hiding it. I just figured Wolfe would want first look before I volunteered to Kramer's cavalry. It was nearly dusk when I hit the subway uptown. The cars rattled like tin coffins, and all I could think of was that man saying my name like we'd shared a drink last night. By the time I climbed the brownstone steps on 35th Street, I was still holding that envelope like it might hum. Inside, the office was warm and smelled of book leather and Fritz's veal stock. Wolfe was in his chair, as stationary as ever, hands folded on his middle like a parliament of fingers. He didn't bother to look up. "You were late," he said. "I was delayed by a pedestrian who turned into a statistic," I said, dropping my hat and coat. "He also left you a calling card." That got him to glance over the rim of his book. "Indeed." I laid the envelope on the desk blotter. He said, and I quote, "Tell Wolfe the ledger's due." Then he took a cab, terminally. Wolfe's brows folded like bad origami. He opened the envelope delicately, using a letter opener as though it might bite. Out came 5 crisp $1,000 bills and a torn half of a restaurant check. He made a sound halfway between a grunt and a curse. "Phooey." "Strong language," I said. "For that kind of tip, I'll take being delayed any day." "Archie," he said, in the tone that could freeze coffee, "you will kindly refrain from levity when a corpse enters by proxy." "Technically," I said, "it entered by envelope." He gave me the look that precedes a sermon. Money is the most explicit form of temptation. $5,000 unsolicited constitutes an attempt to corrupt my judgment. "Or," I offered, "it's a down payment on your genius." He ignored that and studied the bills under the desk lamp, his fingers precise and slow. "New currency, consecutive numbers, Bank of Issuance, Federal Reserve, Series 1945. He sniffed lightly. "Traced, perhaps, or counterfeit." "I'll get them checked tomorrow," I said. "You will not." His tone clipped the air. "They will be secured." I moved toward the torn check. "The handwriting looks female," I said, "and the edge matches a rip. Could be from one of those club restaurants. See the faint house here? He leaned closer, adjusted the lamp and nodded. Astute, if speculative. We will retain it. Just then, Fritz appeared at the doorway, silent as a sermon, holding the dinner tray. The scent of beef bourguignon cut through the tension. He looked from Wolfe to me, his blue eyes round. Something is wrong? Something is always wrong, I told him. This time it's worth 5 grand and a dead man. Fritz frowned, but Wolfe waved him off. Dinner will proceed at the usual hour. Yes, sir. Fritz vanished, leaving the smell of butter behind. Wolfe gestured toward the safe. Place the envelope there. I did, spinning the dial shut. Locked and loaded. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. Describe the man. Late 40s. Good tailor, nervous hands, eyes like they'd forgotten sleep. He called me by name, which means someone briefed him or followed me. I didn't recognize him from any previous case. Did he have an accent? American, possibly educated East Coast, but the words came out strained. He was scared, Wolfe. Wolfe closed his eyes. Fear and finance are old bedfellows. The ledger, he said. Curious phrasing. Could mean anything from blackmail to bookkeeping, I said. You've been paid in stranger currencies. He opened his eyes. Your flippancy is tedious. My charm, on the other hand, priceless. He ignored me and rang for beer with the bell cord. When Fritz returned, he placed a chilled glass beside the chair. Wolfe lifted it ceremoniously, like he was toasting someone's idiocy, probably mine. Mr. Goodwin, he said after a long sip, you have brought me a corpse's confidence. I will tolerate this intrusion for tonight only. Tomorrow, you will ascertain his identity and the origin of that envelope. That's fine, I said. But what do I tell Kramer when he hears I was at the scene? Tell him the truth, Wolfe said smoothly. That you were present by accident, and nothing about the envelope. That'll go over great. He loves partial truths. Wolfe's eyes twinkled barely. Then you must lie with conviction. I dropped into my chair, stretching my legs. You know, someday your devotion to honesty is going to get me indicted. Nonsense. You are nimble enough to evade such consequences. Flattery noted. Still, 5,000's a nice gesture. Maybe it's a thank you from an admirer. Do not be absurd, he said. Admiration seldom carries cash. Depends on the admirer. He gave the briefest of smiles before smothering it. Archie, you are a sentimental fool with mercenary impulses. Better than an immovable genius with a beer fetish. He grunted, a sound that, in Wolfe's language, translates roughly to, I'm fond of you but refuse to admit it. We sat in silence for a while. Outside, the city hummed under snowlight, a rhythm you could almost set to a metronome, cabs, shouts, life moving on as if it hadn't just tossed a corpse at my feet. Finally, Wolfe said, This matter will be contained. No inquiries tonight. At 9 in the morning, I have orchids. Of course, I said. Wouldn't want murder interfering with the cypripediums. He eyed me with long, suffering patience. You will compose a memorandum of the event. Include every detail. I will consider it after breakfast. I rolled a fresh sheet into the typewriter and started tapping. Subject: stranger, ledger, cab. Outcome: 1 corpse, 1 mystery, and a safe now holding more temptation than St. Peter ever faced. Wolfe had gone silent again, sipping his beer, gaze fixed somewhere beyond the lamplight. Maybe he was already dissecting motives, tracing invisible ledgers of guilt and greed. Or maybe he was thinking about the next course Fritz would serve. With Wolfe, you could never tell. When the clock struck 8, Fritz reappeared with dinner, exactly on time. Wolfe rose, brushed an invisible speck from his sleeve and said, Lock the office, no interruptions until tomorrow. I nodded, pocketing the key. Sure, only death, fire, or Kramer's warrant will get me before breakfast. Preferably not death, he said dryly. You owe me the morning report. I watched him disappear toward the dining room, the scent of bourguignon trailing him like a peace treaty. I turned off the desk lamp, leaving the room in half shadow. The safe gleamed faintly under the light from the hall, holding its secrets behind steel and Wolfe's sense of order. As I locked the door, I glanced once more at the streetlight outside the window, its glow reflecting on the snow like a banker's conscience, cold, neat, and temporary. If the stranger's ledger was due, somebody had decided to close the account early, and from the look of things, the collection agency had just put me on retainer. It was one of those mornings when even the brownstone felt cautious. The city outside was silver with cold sunlight, the kind that makes glass look richer and people poorer. Wolfe was upstairs among the orchids, leaving me to guard civilization in the form of the office telephone. I was halfway through typing last night's memorandum when the doorbell rang, one of those polite, ladylike rings that somehow sounded expensive. Fritz appeared at the door a moment later, as quiet as ever, saying, "A lady, Mr. Goodwin. She asks for Mr. Wolfe." That got my attention. We don't get ladies before noon unless it's urgent, foolish, or profitable. "Show her in," I said, and straightened my tie just in case it was all three. She entered the office like a rumour wrapped in perfume, tall, veiled, and carrying a handbag that looked large enough to hold a conscience, but probably didn't. Her voice was low, trained, the kind that could have ordered room service in 3 languages. "I am Mrs. Lenore Baird," she said. "I believe your employer expects me." Wolfe hadn't mentioned any appointments, but he also hadn't mentioned finding $5,000 in an envelope last night. I played it cool. "He will presently. May I take your coat?" She declined, and I took that as code for keep your distance. "My husband was killed yesterday," she said quietly. "I read it in the morning papers. Man struck by cab outside Wall Street offices. His name was Richard Baird." That name hit the air like a gavel. Wolfe chose that moment to enter. Perfect timing as usual, as though he'd been listening through the floorboards. He advanced with the slow dignity of a king inspecting a guest he didn't trust. "Madam," he said, bowing slightly, "you will accept my condolences. Please, be seated." She lowered herself onto the red leather chair opposite his desk, veil still in place. Wolfe folded into his own chair, fingertips steepled. "You claim the deceased was your husband?" She nodded. Richard was an accountant for Brayton and Cole. He suspected irregularities in the books, false entries, shell accounts. He meant to expose them. Her hands trembled slightly as she drew off her gloves. He was frightened. He said if anything happened to him, I was to come to you. He trusted you. That made Wolfe's brows contract. "I did not know Mr. Baird." "I suppose not," she said. "But he knew of you, your reputation for discretion. He said you could find the missing ledger, that it would be payment enough." I cleared my throat. "Payment might not be the issue. Last night someone delivered an envelope with $5,000 inside. Would that be your doing?" Her chin lifted, just enough to show pride through the veil. "Yes, my husband left it for you. A retainer of sorts." Wolfe gave me the kind of look that says don't gloat. He turned back to her. "Madam, I prefer clarity before payment. Why this secrecy?" "Because," she said, "if this becomes public, half of Wall Street will tremble. My husband discovered falsified ledgers in a brokerage handling government contracts, names that cannot be named. If you reveal what he found, you'll have senators and bankers beating at your door, not clients, enemies." Her words had the chill of someone used to luxury and danger in equal doses. Wolfe regarded her a long moment. "The $5,000 will remain untouched until the provenance of your claim is established. I will require a written statement, witnessed, in due course." She inclined her head. "As you wish." He gestured toward the envelope on his desk. "If I accept this commission, you will submit to my method. You will tell me everything, later under oath if necessary." She hesitated. "You mean in court?" "I mean before me," he said dryly. I watched her weigh that like a jeweler studying a fake diamond. She finally nodded. Outside, a car horn bleated twice, sharp, deliberate. She glanced toward the window, then at her wristwatch, a slim gold piece that probably cost more than my Plymouth. "If you have finished, Mr. Wolfe, my driver is waiting." "Indeed?" Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly. "Does your driver also handle your correspondence?" "My driver minds his own business," she said evenly. I walked her to the door. The air that followed her smelled of jasmine and money. When she reached the stoop, I noticed the driver, a big man with shoulders like a moving van and the kind of jaw that looked better in a fight than a photograph. His cap sat too low, and a revolver print bulged under his coat. As she stepped into the car, I caught the number on the fender, 7M894, and made a mental note. When I came back inside, Wolfe was still in his chair, eyes half closed. "Your observations, Archie?" She's either the grieving widow she claims to be, I said, or she's playing the best hand ever dealt in a crooked game. When a lady's purse jingles louder than her conscience, I start counting my change. He opened his eyes. Cynicism is not analysis. Maybe not, I said, but it keeps me solvent. He reached for the bell cord, gave it a brief tug, then changed his mind and released it. No interruptions. We must consider. This woman may be genuine or a diversion designed to distance us from the police. I raised an eyebrow. You think Kramer's going to show up again already? He will, inevitably, but not yet. For now, you will identify the driver. I started toward the hat rack. On my way. You will not, Wolfe snapped. His tone landed like a brick. You will not risk being followed by anyone less scrupulous than yourself. Whoever watches her, watches us. Then how do we find out? We wait, he said firmly. If she lied, her lie will return like a homing pigeon. If she told the truth, it will perch where I can see it. That's poetic, I said, and about as helpful as snow in August. He glared. Do not tempt me to exercise discipline. I grinned. You mean fire me again? You'd starve. That earned me a long sigh, which for Wolfe equals affection. Archie, he said at last, you may note that in the ledger of life, loyalty is a rare currency. Spend it judiciously. Sure, I said, but if it's all the same, I'd like to keep the receipts. He turned his chair toward the window, where the morning light painted him in golden shadow. The safe gleamed in the corner, locked on its new secret. Outside, a motorcar purred away from the curb, carrying Mrs. Baird and her lies or her danger into the traffic of Manhattan. I sat down at the typewriter and began another memo. Subject, widow, ledger, and one-armed chauffeur. Observation, Wolfe's curiosity officially purchased wholesale. By the time I finished, Wolfe was silent again, fingers pressed together, thinking in the language of logic and danger. At exactly 11, he stood. The orchids, he said simply, and left the room. I leaned back in my chair, watching the dust dance in the sunlight, and thought about Mrs. Baird's perfume. Whatever game had started yesterday on Pine Street wasn't over. It had just found its banker. The next morning at 10, I was back among the tall buildings where money grows on nerves. Midtown had that chill optimism of a weekday, men in grey suits streaming into offices like mercury into thermometers. I'd swapped my usual credentials for a Gazette press card Wolfe had arranged years ago, one of those convenient fictions that can open doors faster than a badge. Brayton and Cole occupied 2 glittering floors of a limestone tower that looked allergic to bad credit. The lobby smelled of floor wax, cigars, and ambition. A marble receptionist with a voice like dry ice asked my business. Archie Goodwin, Gazette, I said. Doing a piece on brokerage transparency. Mr. Cole's firm came highly recommended by the folks who still have their shirts. She blinked at me, as though wit wasn't in her job description. After a phone call full of crisp yes sirs, she waved me toward the elevators. The boardroom on the 22nd floor was a stage set for success. Mahogany table, leather chairs, and a view of the East River that made the city look honest. Harold Cole stood near the window, tall and polished, wearing a suit that probably had its own attorney. His grey hair gleamed like stock silver, and his smile had the tensile strength of a bridge cable. Mr. Goodwin, he said warmly, extending a hand. A pleasure. Always glad to assist the press. I took the hand, firm, dry, too rehearsed. That's noble of you, Mr. Cole. Most brokers treat reporters like auditors with typewriters. He chuckled. Nonsense. We have nothing to hide. That was his first lie, and it arrived right on schedule. He gestured toward a chair. Now, how may I help? Transparency, was it? Partly, I said, taking out my notebook. Also your late accountant, Richard Baird. Cole's expression didn't twitch, which meant he'd practiced. A tragedy. I read it this morning. Terrible accident. You knew him well? He shook his head slowly. We employ many accountants. I'm afraid I can't place the name. Was he one of ours? His widow seems to think so. Ah, Cole's voice softened, the kind of sympathy you buy wholesale. Poor woman. Still, accidents happen in this city every day. I don't see what it has to do with us. Neither do I said cheerfully. But rumour has it he was looking into your ledgers. That got a reaction. A pause barely long enough to butter toast, but it was there. He smiled again, tighter this time. Rumour, Mr. Goodwin, is a currency we do not trade in. Good motto, I said, pocketing my pencil. So, if I print that Brayton & Cole runs a clean ship, you won't have to sue the Gazette for libel? He laughed. Certainly not. We welcome the scrutiny. I stood, offering my hand again. You're a brave man, Mr. Cole, and a good liar, but maybe I'm overpaying for the compliment. His fingers stiffened. I beg your pardon? Forget it, I said lightly. Occupational hazard. I start believing my own copy. As I turned to go, a faint smell drifted across the polished room. Cigar smoke, strong and bitter. I knew that brand. Kramer's brand. Either the inspector had been here, or Cole borrowed his taste in tobacco. Downstairs, the lobby looked cleaner than a confession. I lingered by the newsstand, bought a pack of gum, and noted two men pretending not to watch me, one with a folded newspaper, the other adjusting his tie so often it could have been Morse code. I left through the revolving door, humming loud enough to be remembered but not followed. By the time I reached the brownstone, it was noon, and Fritz had the place smelling like a Swiss holiday. Wolfe was in the office, sleeves rolled to his wrists, a look on his face that meant he'd already deduced more than I'd discovered. You were prompt, he said, as I dropped my hat and coat. What have you? 2 marble floors, 1 expensive liar, and a lobby that gleams like money laundering itself. He tilted his head. Colourful. Spare me the journalism. What did Cole say? That he'd never heard of Baird, which is fine, except his pulse disagreed. Indeed. Wolfe's eyes half closed. Describe him. Tall, tan, 50-ish, nervous only between sentences. He smokes the same cigars as Kramer, which makes me suspect they either share a tobacconist or a conscience. That coaxed a faint grunt of amusement. You are implying Mr. Cole is in league with the police? I'm implying he smells guilty and expensive. You'd have liked him, the kind of man who thinks discretion is a tax deduction. Wolfe sighed and leaned back, fingers steepled. I assume you maintained your pose as a journalist? Perfectly. Even took notes. He believed every word until I mentioned the widow. Then his varnish cracked. Ah, Wolfe murmured. So he does know of her. Or knows enough to fear her. Either way, he's hiding something under that manicure. Wolfe's gaze drifted to the safe. The 5,000 remains untouched, naturally. Of course, I said. Temptation's locked up tighter than Fritz's schnitzel recipe. He didn't dignify that with a reply. Mr. Cole's evasions suggest protection. But of whom? Brayton, perhaps, or someone beyond his reach, a regulator, a politician. I pulled the torn half of the restaurant check from my pocket. Maybe this helps. The edge says the Rit. I did some alphabet in my head, and unless it's the Ritalin Diner, I'm betting the Rittenhouse Club. That caught him. Wolfe's eyes sharpened like camera lenses. A private dining establishment on Madison Avenue, membership restricted to financial elites and their parasites. Sounds cozy, I said. You want me to drop by for tea? Phooey, he tapped the desk. You will confirm the origin of that check, but with prudence. I will not have you gallivanting like a gossip columnist. Come on, I said. I'm your eyes, not your echo chamber. He grunted, a sound halfway between disapproval and affection. Your wit compensates poorly for your impetuosity. Still, I said, it's what keeps me employed. He opened his eyes fully, fixing me with that slow, amused glare that could flatten a senator. You may proceed after lunch. Until then, attend to your memorandum, and for the love of logic, no improvisations. At that moment, Fritz appeared in the doorway, napkin over arm. Lunch is served, gentlemen. Salvation, Wolfe said, rising. Archie, you will dine, then compose your report. We reconvene at 2. Yes, sir. He paused at the threshold. And Archie, yeah? Should Mr. Cole's associates attempt to contact you, do not indulge your curiosity. You are irritating enough alive. I grinned. That's touching coming from you. He permitted himself a small snort, the Wolfe equivalent of affection, and disappeared toward the dining room. After lunch I typed my report. Subject, Brayton and Cole. Findings, deceit polished to a shine, senior partner smoother than Fritz's custard. Noted probable link between deceased Baird and Rittenhouse Club. Pending confirmation. At 2:30, Wolfe re-emerged with a beer, sat and read the report line by line. "Acceptable," he said finally. "You will telephone Mr. Cohen at the Gazette, discreetly ask whether the Rittenhouse has ever appeared in financial scandals. Lon will want to know why." "Tell him," Wolfe said, "that curiosity is contagious. He should vaccinate himself." I made the call, keeping my tone casual. Lon laughed on the other end. "Rittenhouse Club? That's where the heavy hitters play poker with conscience money. I'll dig around. But watch yourself, Archie. Last reporter who tried got invited to lunch and didn't come back for dessert." "Appreciate the pep talk," I said, and hung up. When I turned, Wolfe was studying me, head tilted. "Well?" "Cohen's on it. He says the club's where the rich gamble with respectability." Wolfe nodded once. Appropriate. The name Ledger now resonates with irony. He stared into the air for a long moment, lost in thought. "Archie, we proceed on the assumption that Mr. Cole shields a patron of that club, perhaps someone tied to government contracts during the war. If that is true, the sum paid us was not for discovery, but for silence." "Meaning," I said, "we've been hired to keep our mouths shut about something we haven't found yet." "Precisely, which means we must find it before they pay us again." I leaned back, lighting a cigarette. If money talks, this bunch had it rehearsing for Broadway. He closed his eyes. "You are incorrigible." "True, but effective." He reached for the bell cord. "Fritz, coffee." Then to me, "When you visit the Rittenhouse, take care. Their cuisine is impeccable, their ethics indigestible." "Comforting thought," I said. "I'll wear my moral napkin." He opened one eye. "Archie, when you jest, I despair for civilization." "Then I'm doing my job." He made that small, reluctant noise again. Not quite a grunt, not quite approval. Outside, the streetcars clanged and the city kept moving, oblivious. Inside, Wolfe sipped his coffee, already 3 moves ahead. And me? I had a date with an exclusive club where the soup probably cost more than my suit. If you ever want to measure the gap between the haves and the have-nots, try ordering a whiskey sour at the Rittenhouse Club. The ice cubes look like they've been carved from the conscience of a banker, hard, clear, and untouchable. It was a little after 6, the hour when men with cufflinks loosen their morals and discuss the Dow Jones as if it were scripture. I'd done my homework. Harold Cole was a member, which meant I was now an associate from his firm. A rented tux, a steady grin, and a confident walk can get you through most doors in New York, and this one opened on cue. The lobby was all brass railings and discreet chandeliers, the kind that didn't light so much as glow approvingly. A maitre d' looked me over with the kind of suspicion usually reserved for tax auditors. "Good evening, sir. Member name?" "Cole," I said smoothly, flashing the smile that's got me out of worse scrapes. "Harold Cole. He told me to meet him for a drink. Archie Goodwin." The name didn't register with him, which was just fine. He waved me toward the lounge with the weary tolerance of a man paid to police wealth without touching it. Inside, the place oozed exclusivity. A grand piano murmured in the corner, and the air was thick with tobacco that probably paid for half the upholstery. Men in pinstripes were clustered in low conversation. Women glittered like stock certificates come to life. I found the bar, ordered a whiskey sour I didn't want, and started scanning. That's when I saw it. Framed above the register, a display of antique checks signed by honoured members. One bore the familiar rip, the jagged edge that matched our half-perfect souvenir from the dead man. Below the frame, a discreet brass plaque read, "Donated by M. Jenks, club cashier." Bingo. I leaned on the bar. "Say, pal," I told the bartender, "is this M. Jenks around? I've got a question about his fine penmanship." The bartender froze halfway through wiping a glass. "Mr. Jenks? He's, on leave." "Long leave?" He hesitated. "You could say that. Haven't seen him in 2 days." I dropped a casual nod and sipped my drink. "If he comes back, tell him Goodwin's looking to settle a tab." Before he could answer, a shadow fell over me, and it smelled like expensive perfume and trouble rehearsed in silk. "Goodwin?" a voice said. Low, female, amused. I turned. She was brunette, slim, and too poised for the hour. Her dress was black with a neckline that could have been charged with intent. "You have me at a disadvantage," I said, trying not to look impressed. "Everyone does, eventually." She smiled. "You don't know me, but I've heard your name." "Now that's always unsettling," I said. Where did you hear it? Here. There. A few whispers in town. Someone's been asking questions about you. About Wolfe. She lifted her glass, eyes never leaving mine. And not in a social way. I played it light. We're popular these days. Comes with being semi-respectable. Her smile didn't waver. Respectable isn't the word I heard. Before I could reply, a man at a nearby table rose. Grey suit, cold eyes, and the way he watched her told me I wasn't the only one tuned in. She noticed too. I should go, she said, finishing her drink. If I were you, I'd stay out of ledgers that don't belong to you. Lady, I said, in this town, everything belongs to someone else. She left without answering. The man in grey followed a minute later. I gave it another 5, then paid my bill and took the subway home, leaving behind the taste of whiskey, perfume, and the certainty that I'd been sized up and filed under expendable. By the time I hit West 35th Street, the brownstone looked like safety dressed in brick. Inside, the air was warm with Fritz's handiwork and Wolfe's disapproval, both tangible. Wolfe was in his chair, a book open but ignored. On his desk lay the latest edition of the Gazette, headline screaming, "Accountant killed by hit and run." Source says Wolfe consulted. Lon must have sniffed it from Centre Street. We hadn't told him a thing. I didn't need a crystal ball to predict the next 5 minutes. "Goodwin," he said, in the tone that suggests a tribunal. "Explain this abomination." "Publicity," I said cheerfully, taking the paper, "keeps us in the public mind." "Pfui," he said, almost spitting the word. "The public mind is a cesspool." Before I could answer, the bell rang and Fritz appeared. "Inspector Kramer to see you, sir." Wolfe's eyes rolled heavenward. "Send him in, and bring beer." Kramer entered like a man walking into a trap he already regretted. He had the paper folded under his arm, the inevitable cigar clenched in his teeth. "Wolfe," he growled, "you sure know how to make my day harder." "Good evening, Inspector," Wolfe said smoothly. "You appear fatigued. Beer will fortify your patience." Kramer gave a grunt halfway between thanks and protest, took the glass Fritz offered, and sat. "You know what this headline does? It tells every reporter and half the DA's office that you're sniffing around my case." "It is not your case," Wolfe corrected mildly. "The deceased retained me before his unfortunate demise. I am fulfilling an obligation to his widow." Kramer barked a humorless laugh. "Widow? That's rich. Her husband's been dead 2 years." That took the room down to silence. Wolfe's hand froze halfway to the bell cord. "Repeat that," he said softly. "I checked," Kramer said. "Richard Baird died in Chicago in 47. The woman you've been talking to is no widow. She's a fake." I whistled low. In this market, truth was selling short. Kramer glared at me. "You think this is funny?" "Not yet," I said, "but I like the setup." Wolfe's voice came quiet and flat. "Inspector, you are certain?" "I've got the death certificate. Same name, same photo. Whoever she is, she's playing you." Wolfe's fingers drummed the armrest once, twice. "And you came to inform me out of, what, professional courtesy?" Kramer scowled. "I came because this woman might be tied to a fraud ring, or worse. I don't need you making it harder." Wolfe leaned back, the anger visible in his stillness. "You insult me. I have no intention of abetting impostors. The retainer, as of this moment, is void." "Good," Kramer said. "Now stay clear." He stood, draining his glass. "I'll have Stebbins drop by tomorrow for a statement." "Splendid," Wolfe murmured. "Fritz will see you out." Kramer stopped at the door. "One thing, Wolfe, off the record," his voice lowered, roughened by honesty. "That woman had polish. You be careful. These people don't bluff cheap." Then he left, shutting the door like punctuation. For a long moment, Wolfe didn't move. The silence stretched thick enough to slice. Finally he said, "Archie, the ledger. Describe the fragment again." "The written, printed in blue, same as the club menu. Signature, M. Jenks, club cashier, missing 2 days." He nodded slowly. "So, a false widow, a vanished cashier, and 5,000 tainted dollars. Deception as currency indeed." He reached for his beer but didn't drink. "Pfui, I have been played for a fool." "That makes 2 of us," I said, though my rate's lower. He looked at me sharply. "You find this amusing?" "No," I said, "but I find it motivating. She lied to both of us, And Baird's still dead. Whoever she is, she wanted you in the dark, which means you're dangerous to her. That is not comforting. Then here's comfort. You're still the smartest man in the room. He studied me a moment, then sighed. Flattery, Archie, is a poor substitute for competence. True, I said, but it keeps morale up. He rose, not a common occurrence, and walked to the window. She deceived me, and you. Sure, I said, but she didn't deceive the safe. That earned a glance. You still have the money? Locked tight. Good, he said. It will pay for our penance. Meaning what? He turned. We will pursue the truth, not for fee or favour, but for necessity. She made it personal. I grinned. Welcome to my side of the street. He returned to his chair, sinking into it like a general back to his war map. You will find Jenks, quietly. If he lives, he knows where the ledger went. If not, I'll find out who wanted him quiet. Precisely. I stood, stretching. Guess my evening just got longer. Wolfe waved a hand. Go, but exercise discretion. You are recognizable, and evidently someone finds you worth inquiring about. Don't worry, I said. I'll keep a low profile. Maybe even pay my bar tab this time. Archie, he said, tone softening, be prudent. I do not relish the thought of replacing you. Touching, I said, heading for the door. Try not to miss me before midnight. He didn't answer, which in Wolfe's dialect means affection. As I left the office, I heard the faint clink of the beer glass, his way of sealing the vow. Outside, the street was black with drizzle, neon reflections running down the pavement like ink. Somewhere in the city, a woman who wasn't a widow and a cashier who wasn't at work were cashing in their secrets. And me? I had a hunch that in this particular ledger, every entry was written in someone else's blood. The Hotel Alcott was the kind of place that gave modesty a bad name. Thin walls, cheaper wallpaper, and a lobby clerk who looked like he'd been trained by the Treasury in not giving change. The neon sign outside flickered between hotel and hell, which, if you ask me, was pretty accurate branding. It was 9 that night when I got there. Wolfe had wanted me to wait until morning, but since when do I take my orders from bedtime? The desk clerk squinted when I asked for Mrs. Lenore Baird. No one by that name, he said, without checking the register. Try Lenore Burns, I suggested, sliding a 5 across the counter. His fingers made the bill vanish like it was evidence. Room 312, he said, end of the hall. I knocked once. The door opened halfway, chain still on, and a familiar pair of eyes looked out, shadowed, wary, and knowing too much for their own good. Goodwin, she breathed, you shouldn't have come. Lady, that line's copyrighted by every corpse in Manhattan, I said. Mind if I step in before you join the list? She hesitated, then unhooked the chain. The room was lit by a single lamp, its shade tilted like it had seen too much. She was in a dark robe, hair loose, the kind of beauty that gets noticed even when it's scared. I'm not Mrs. Baird, she said before I asked. My name's Lenore Burns. I was Richard's assistant. And his widow in rehearsal, I said. Her mouth twitched. Guilt or pride, hard to tell. We were going to expose them, Cole, Brayton, all of them. Richard found a second set of ledgers, proof they were forging contracts, laundering war bonds. He said if anything happened, I was to bring the evidence to you. The envelope was my protection. So that $5,000 retainer was a life insurance policy, I said. Nice gesture, lousy return. Her hand shook as she lit a cigarette. Someone found out. They followed him for weeks. The night before he died, he said he'd hidden the ledger. I have the key. She reached into her robe pocket, drew out a small brass key on a string. Midtown Locker, Terminal Exchange, number 47. But I can't go back there. I'm being watched. By who? I don't know, she whispered. A man in a grey coat. He was in the hotel lobby an hour ago. I crossed to the window, lifted the blind just enough to check. Nothing but the reflection of a tired detective and the flicker of neon. You should have come clean sooner. Her laugh was small and bitter. Would you have believed me? Lady, I said, I'm not your priest, but you might want to start confessing faster. She dropped onto the bed, cigarette trembling. There's more. The blue index. The what? A shell fund. Off the books. All the dirty transfers went through it. If you find that name in the ledger, you'll find everyone involved. Politicians, bankers, maybe worse. She looked up at me, eyes wide now. Promise me you'll give it to Wolfe. He'll know what to do. He usually does, I said, though it costs extra when clients lie. I didn't lie, she said. I just stopped telling the truth. I pulled out the phone on the nightstand and dialed the brownstone. Fritz answered, sounding like the Swiss Alps in slippers. Nero Wolfe's residence. It's Goodwin. Get Wolfe. There was a pause, then his voice, heavy as an anchor. Mr. Goodwin. Found our widow. Turns out she's the secretary. She's got a key to a locker with the missing ledger. Says she's being tailed. Mr. Goodwin, he said, each syllable polished to precision. Exercise prudence for once in your theatrical life. Return immediately. I'll stop by the locker first. Archie. His tone could have frosted steel. No. Yes, I said, and hung up before he could make it an order. Lenore smiled faintly. You don't take direction well. Only from women who cook, I said. Pack your things, I'll get you out of here. She nodded and turned toward the dresser. That's when the phone rang, sharp, sudden. We both froze. She reached for it, hesitated. Don't, I said. The ringing stopped. Silence stretched thick enough to touch. Maybe they think I'm gone, she said. Maybe. Maybe nothing. You're checking out. Now. But she shook her head. No. If they're watching, you'll lead them. Then I'll play tour guide. Give me the key. She pressed it into my hand, cold against my palm. Locker 47. Don't trust anyone from Brayton and Cole. I've got a long list of people not to trust, I said. You're just adding to the guestbook. I left her with a promise I didn't mean and headed for the elevator. By the time I reached the street, the grey-coated man she'd mentioned was nowhere in sight, or everywhere, depending how you looked at it. I slipped the key into my pocket and headed toward the nearest subway, rehearsing my story for Wolfe. At 10:10, the phone in the brownstone rang. I was just hanging up my coat when Fritz handed it to me. His eyes said enough. Trouble. Inspector Kramer's voice came through like gravel. Goodwin? You know a woman named Lenore Burns? Maybe. Depends on who's asking. I'm asking, he said. She's dead. Hotel Alcott. Looks like suicide. The floor shifted under me. She was alive an hour ago. Not anymore, Kramer said grimly. You might want to tell your boss before I get there. I hung up and called Wolfe. He answered on the second ring. She's dead, I said. Lenore. Hanging, but what? There were bruises on her wrists. Fresh ones. Suicide doesn't usually come with fingerprints. Silence on the line. Then Wolfe's voice. Colder than anything Fritz could chill. You were warned. I know. Where is the key? In my pocket. Keep it there, he said. Do not move until I instruct you. If the police arrive, cooperate fully. Kramer's already on his way. Then he will have company, Wolfe said. Mr. Pantzer is en route. You are to stay alive, Archie. Working on it, I said. When I hung up, I went back to the Alcott. The place was swarming with blue uniforms and the smell of cheap soap and death. Kramer was there, cigar clenched, eyes narrowed. He gave me a look that said he'd run out of patience years ago. You again? Mind telling me why every time I get a stiff you're within smelling distance? Coincidence, I said. I'm just lucky that way. He grunted. Looks like a hanging, but I don't buy it. You were here tonight? Yeah. She was scared, not suicidal. He studied me for a long second. You sure about that? No, I said. But whoever did it wanted me to think so. He puffed his cigar. Then you're part of their plan. Congratulations. I didn't answer. My eyes were on the lamp, tilted just like before, and the faint mark on the floor where she'd dropped the cigarette. Whatever had happened here wasn't an ending. It was an invoice. And Wolfe never left a bill unpaid. If you ever want to see Nero Wolfe lose his appetite, try handing him a subpoena before lunch. It was 10 minutes past 12, and I was just about to remind him of the clock when the front bell rang, long, hard, and with the kind of impatience that could only belong to one man. Inspector Kramer, I said. He's early, he's mad, or he's out of cigars. Wolfe didn't look up from his desk. Mr. Kramer's punctuality, like his temper, varies inversely with his evidence. Admit him. When Kramer entered, he brought February with him, the cold, the grey, and a smell of wet tobacco. He didn't waste time on greetings. All right, Wolfe, he growled, throwing a brown envelope onto the desk. Explain this. I took it and slid out the contents, a carbon copy of a typewritten suicide note. Wolfe adjusted his glasses. To Mr. Nero Wolfe, he read aloud. I can't face what I've done, forgive me. Signed, Lenore Burns. He set it down. Fabricated. Kramer blew smoke toward the ceiling. Maybe, maybe not. The DA doesn't like maybes. He wants to know why a woman who supposedly hired you ends up dead with your name in her farewell. She did not hire me, Wolfe said coldly. She impersonated another woman who did. A fraud cannot create a contract. Kramer's eyes narrowed. You're saying she lied. Again. I'm saying she existed in a fog of deceit, and now that fog has lifted, fatally. Kramer tapped his cigar on the desk edge, scattering ash onto Wolfe's blotter. I winced. Fritz would notice. Look, Kramer said, I don't think you strung her up, but the DA's sniffing obstruction. That $5,000 you've got locked up is blood money until proven otherwise. Wolfe leaned back, lips pressed thin. The retainer remains secured. Until rightful ownership is determined, I am a fiduciary custodian. Kramer gave a humorless laugh. You and your $10 words. Try that with the DA. He'll make you custodian of a cell block. Language does not frighten me, Wolfe said, voice even, nor do prosecutors who mistake form for substance. Archie Goodwin, referee at large, decided to pipe in. If it helps, Inspector, I can testify that Wolfe hasn't spent a dime. He hasn't even let me near it, which is cruel and unusual. Kramer ignored me. The note puts you in this, Wolfe. You can't lawyer talk your way around it. Perhaps not, Wolfe said mildly. But the truth, however belated, will suffice. Truth, Kramer barked. We've got evidence, not philosophy. Indeed, Wolfe murmured, and I rely upon your incorruptible devotion to it. He fixed Kramer with that basilisk stare that could make a senator confess to jaywalking. Your honesty, Inspector, is as relentless as your cigar smoke. For a second, the corner of Kramer's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close enough to qualify as détente. Flattery won't save you. It isn't flattery, Wolfe said. It's fatigue. I tire of incompetence. Yours, fortunately, is honest. That got a grunt, which in Kramer's vocabulary might translate as thank you. He rose. I've got to play the DA's hand. But for what it's worth, I told him you don't kill women. You kill grammar. I bit back a grin. That's almost friendly. Kramer handed me another document, Lenore's police file. Read the last page. I flipped it open. Item 7. Fingerprint recovered from subject's suitcase handle. Partial, smudged, ink-stained. Ink-stained? Wolfe repeated. Kramer nodded. Like she'd been handling a ledger page. We're checking with Brayton and Cole's office to see if it matches anything in their files, if there are any files left. He buttoned his coat. Don't leave town, Wolfe, either of you. I rarely leave this room, Wolfe said. Then don't make me change that. As Kramer headed for the door, I said, Inspector, when this clears, maybe I'll send the DA a dictionary under your name. He snorted. Just send me a case I can close without your boss in it. The door shut behind him with a tired finality. I looked at Wolfe. You know, for a guy threatening us with obstruction, he's starting to sound fond. Do not indulge in anthropomorphism, Wolfe said dryly. Mr. Kramer's civility is a symptom of exhaustion, not affection. Still, I said, I'd rather have his cigar smoke than his warrant. Both are unpleasant, he muttered, reaching for the bell cord. Fritz, beer. While Fritz fetched the therapy, Wolfe leaned back, eyes half closed. The fingerprint, ink-stained. The ledger she mentioned, the missing one. Mr. Jenks handled it. If Miss Burns possessed it, even briefly, then the path narrows. Jenks, I said, the missing cashier, you think he's our link? I think, Wolfe said, he is either dead or about to be. Comforting thought, he reached for the phone. Saul Panzer. Already? I asked. We just buried Lenore. He didn't glance at me. If we delay, we may bury another. Mr. Panzer will find Mr. Jenks before the police do, discreetly. He spoke into the receiver when Saul answered. A man named Monsieur Jenks, cashier at the Rittenhouse Club, last seen 2 days ago. Trace him. Report tonight. Fee standard. He hung up and turned to me. And you, Archie, will stay here. That last part had the force of law. Stay here, I repeated. While Saul plays bloodhound? Yes. Meaning you think someone's still gunning for me? I think, he said slowly, your talent for encountering corpses borders on the pathological. Until I can redirect that energy into something profitable, you will remain confined. Nice to know I'm irreplaceable. He gave a small grunt somewhere between tolerance and affection. I'm merely preserving my staff. Mr. Kramer's goodwill will not protect you from whoever orchestrated this. I sat down at the desk, lit a cigarette, and started leafing through the police file. You know, I said, Kramer didn't need enemies. He had paperwork. That, Mr. Goodwin, Wolfe replied, is the burden of all honest men. Fritz arrived with the beer, a tall glass, sweating perfection. Wolfe took one long sip and sighed. The DA may have his suspicions. Let him. We shall answer with facts, not fear. Meanwhile, you expect me to sit tight? Correct. And if Jenks shows up at the door? Offer him hospitality, Wolfe said, but only after you've disarmed him. Good to know you care. He gave me a long look. Archie, you are infuriating, indispensable, and prone to melodrama. That combination, while intolerable in others, remains curiously effective in you. Do not test its limits. I saluted him with my cigarette. Yes, sir. I'll try not to die without permission. He didn't answer. The afternoon light had slanted across the desk, turning the beer's gold surface to amber glass. Outside, Manhattan kept breathing, fast, restless, and dirty. Inside, Wolfe sat unmoving, his mind a quiet storm. Somewhere uptown, a man named Jenks was either holding a ledger or being buried with it. And Wolfe, glacial, unflappable Wolfe, was already planning how to balance the books. There are two kinds of phone calls you don't ignore in my line of work, one from Saul Pantzer and one from a woman who's just changed her mind about testifying. Since Lenore was dead, this was the first kind. Queens, Saul said. Cheap boarding house off Crescent Avenue. Jenks is here, jumpy as a frog in kerosene. You'd better come quick. Wolfe told me to stay put, I said. You want to tell him that before or after the guy disappears again? That settled it. Wolfe could scold later. Right then, Queens was calling. The place looked like it had been furnished by a committee of termites. Saul was waiting outside, collar up against the drizzle. He's upstairs, he said, room 7. Says he's got the ledger, but he wants cash and protection. Protection he'll get, I said. Cash he'll have to take on credit. Inside, the hall smelled of cabbage, old carpet, and retreating hope. We knocked. The door opened a crack, then wider. Jenks was a wiry little man with eyes like broken clock springs. He looked at me like I was the second coming of trouble. You Wolfe's man? He asked. Sometimes. Depends on the day. He locked the door behind us, then went to the window to check the street. They think I don't know, but I do. Brayton and Cole, they killed Baird. He found out about the blue index. The what? I said. It's not an index. It's a fund, off the books. Millions moving through dummy bonds, fake names, Wall Street laundering mob cash through private brokerage pools. Baird wanted to turn it over to the feds. Cole's partners ordered a cleanup. He licked his lips. I kept a ledger. It's proof. Where is it? Saul asked. Jenks crouched by the radiator, pried loose a floorboard, and drew out a thick envelope. His hands shook like loose wiring. Right here. I was going to sell it to Wolfe, not for money, for safety. He opened it, and that's when the world blew sideways. The first shot came through the window, glass exploding like ice cubes. Jenks jerked back, blood blooming on his chest. Saul hit the floor, gun out. I ducked behind the dresser, drawing mine, but whoever was out there wasn't sightseeing. 2 more shots cracked, splintering the doorframe. Window, I shouted. 2 exposed, Saul barked. Back stair. We hauled Jenks to cover, but he was already gone, eyes wide, mouth slack. The envelope had spilled papers, one of them catching the edge of the lamp flame. I stomped it out, but not before half of it turned to ash. We bolted. A man in a fedora was coming up the stairwell, pistol low and steady. I fired once, not to hit, just to make him duck. He did, and I took the chance to dive through the back hallway. Something hot grazed my shoulder, bullet or bad aim, and the world went red for a second. Saul grabbed my arm and pulled me through the exit into the alley. Car's 2 blocks over, he said. Fine, I grunted. Next time let's pick a meeting place with fewer bullets. We didn't stop until we were over the bridge and back in Manhattan. The rain had turned to a fine mist and the city lights smeared across it like cheap watercolours. My coat smelled of smoke and cordite, and my shoulder felt like it had been used for target practice. At the brownstone, Fritz met us at the door, eyes wide. Good heavens! Later, I said. Is he in the office? Of course. It is after orchid hours. I staggered in. Wolfe was behind his desk, reading the Gazette as if I hadn't just been ventilated in Queens. He looked up once. You disobeyed me. Sure, I said, dropping into the red leather chair. But I brought souvenirs. Jenks is dead, the ledger's gone, and I got this. I peeled back my coat sleeve to show the blood. For a man who hates exertion, Wolfe moved fast. Fritz, he called, voice sharp. Hot water, antiseptic, bandages. Then to me, you idiot. Nice to see you too, I muttered. He came around the desk, frowning like a disappointed Caesar. With surprising delicacy, he began cleaning the greys, his big fingers surprisingly steady. You know it's serious, I said, when Wolfe handles blood without gloves. Phooey, your recklessness offends me more than your injury. You are not indispensable, Mr. Goodwin, though you appear determined to test the point. Saul's fine, I said. Jenks wasn't. He had the ledger, but someone else wanted it worse. Wolfe's jaw tightened. The blue index, so it exists. Yeah. He said it was a private pool for laundering mob cash through the exchange. Baird tried to blow the whistle. That's why they killed him. And Lenore. He returned to his chair without answering. Silence filled the room like smoke. Finally he said, Describe the men. One shooter outside, one inside, grey hat, brown coat. Professional. Left nothing but air. He nodded once. And the papers? Gone, but part of one caught fire. It's in my coat pocket, unless Fritz threw it out. He reached over for Wolfe, a rare breach of personal space, and pulled a small blackened scrap from the lining of my coat. His eyes narrowed. Parchment bond. Heavy grade. Stationery exclusive to the Rittenhouse Club. That place again, I said. Cole's playground. He turned the fragment over, studying the faint watermark as if it were scripture. So, our blue index was managed through gentility. Gentlemen's clubs, private ledgers, handshakes over brandy, corruption disguised as breeding. I leaned back, wincing. It's the American dream. Crime, but with linen napkins. He looked at me sharply. You nearly died tonight. Do not trivialize it. Sure, I said, but I'd rather crack jokes than skulls. Your flippancy is armor, he said quietly. I am not fooled. That one landed harder than the bullet. Fritz came in with bandages and the faint smell of roast chicken, which reminded me it was past dinner. Wolfe finished taping my shoulder and stepped back. You will rest. Saul will continue the pursuit. I will deal with Inspector Kramer. Kramer's going to love this, I said. Another corpse, another connection to us. He will endure it, Wolfe said grimly. As will we. I watched him return to his desk, the charred scrap between his fingers. His silence wasn't just anger, it was grief, disciplined and private. He'd lost a witness, a ledger, and a measure of faith in the order of things. Finally he spoke, almost to himself. Murder for profit is abhorrent enough, but when cloaked in the vestments of respectability, that, Mr. Goodwin, is blasphemy. Then, I said, I guess we've got a holy war. He didn't reply, but he poured himself a beer, the ritual restored. Fritz lingered at the door, uncertain. Wolfe raised the glass, not to me, but to the air. To the dead, he said softly, and to the living who refused to let them be forgotten. The silence that followed wasn't just mourning, it was the sound of Wolfe loading his mind for vengeance. By 10 that morning, the brownstone was doing its best impression of a bank vault. Silent, sealed, and full of valuables nobody could spend. Wolfe was upstairs with his orchids, communing with nature in the only way he considered safe, through glass and humidity. I was downstairs with the phone, the typewriter, and the remains of a shoulder that still stung when I scratched my ear. Fritz had taken pity on me with coffee and a pastry, shaped like an apology. I was halfway through both when the elevator hummed, and Wolfe appeared. He moved with the measured dignity of a man who considered haste an obscenity. Archie, he said, bring me the police file on Miss Burns. Sure. Which pile is that in? The lawful or the incriminating? He grunted. Neither. The instructive. I handed him the folder Kramer had left behind. Wolfe spread its contents like a croupier, dealing from a deck of gilt. His eyes flicked between the pages, lips pursed, mind calculating faster than any adding machine Wall Street ever built. The blue index, he murmured, was not merely a laundering mechanism. It was an investment pool in which illicit war profits were commingled with legitimate funds, a parasite disguised as patriotism. Nice, I said. Maybe they can print that on their next stock certificate. He ignored me. Cole and his partners used shell companies to purchase discounted war bonds from insiders. The ledger Baird discovered would have exposed not only theft but treason. Meaning Cole's partners had him erased, I said. And Lenore too. He nodded slowly. Yes, but the agent of execution was not Cole himself. It was someone with access to both sides of the operation, correspondence, schedules, private notes, the secretary. Miss Draper, I said, the efficient one with the eyes that could file you alphabetically. The same, Wolfe said. She brokered information between Cole's firm and their criminal benefactors, and when the balance tilted, she paid her debts with others' lives. That kind of logic was pure Wolfe, neat, ruthless, and delivered like a verdict. He reached for the bell cord and gave it a single tug. Fritz, beer. I leaned back. You sure about this, boss? Draper didn't strike me as the trigger-happy type. She would not soil her hands with violence, he said. She would delegate it, with the precision of a stenographer taking dictation. I was about to comment on the poetry of that when the phone rang. I picked it up. Nero Wolfe's residence, Goodwin speaking. Kramer's voice rasped through like sandpaper on brass. Put him on, Archie. Wolfe took the receiver with a sigh. Inspector. I'm about to raid Brayton and Cole, Kramer said. You've had your fun with theories. Now I need facts. Who do I grab first? Inspector, your zeal outpaces your preparation, Wolfe said. You will find nothing but missing files and frightened clerks. Then make it worth my while, Kramer barked. If you know who's behind this, spill it. I will, Wolfe said smoothly, when you assure me Mr. Goodwin's name will not appear in any official report regarding Miss Burns's death. There was a pause long enough to light a cigar. You're bargaining with me now? I am reminding you, Wolfe said, that justice is best served by precision, not prejudice. Another pause, then Kramer exhaled. Fine. You've got my word. Goodwin's clear. Now talk. The murderer, Wolfe said, is a woman named Draper. She will have destroyed correspondence in Cole's office, but her nervousness will betray her. If she attempts flight, follow her. Got it, Kramer said. If you're wrong, I'll send Stebbins to read you your rights. Spare me, Wolfe said, and hung up with a click that sounded like punctuation. I raised an eyebrow. Well, that's teamwork, by our standards. Indeed. He turned toward the window, eyes unfocused, lost somewhere in the arithmetic of guilt. You see, Archie, the equilibrium of deceit is delicate. Remove one weight, and the whole contraption collapses. Sure, I said. Only this one collapses with bullets instead of ledgers. Before he could reply, Fritz appeared at the doorway with the beer tray. There was also an envelope for you, Mr. Wolfe. It came by courier. Leave it. I reached for it first, because curiosity pays better dividends than patience. Heavy stock, cream-coloured, sealed with wax. No return address. Wolfe frowned. Archie. I'm being careful, I said, tearing it open. Inside were half a dozen ledger pages, edges singed, and a note in neat cursive. Payment complete. Debt settled. I handed it over. Wolfe's eyes went half-lidded, his breathing deliberate. He spread the pages on the desk. Numbers marched across them in ink, columns of transactions dressed in the costume of legitimacy. Each entry was a confession signed in dollars. Someone, he said softly, has paid their conscience in installments. Or bought ours, I said. Either way, I'd rather keep this debt unpaid. He didn't answer. He reached for his magnifying glass. Not that he needed it, but Wolfe liked ceremony. His fingertip traced one column, paused at an entry marked Rittenhouse dining account, blue index transfer, authorized Draper. Elegant, he murmured. She sent her guilt through the post, a final ledger balancing. Maybe she's trying to make amends, I offered. He looked up, eyes gleaming. No, Archie, she's maneuvering. A confession by courier is not contrition, it's a gambit. She wishes to deflect suspicion, perhaps even purchase our silence. Then she should have sent a check, I said. He ignored me, turning to Fritz. Fritz, 2 beers. Cold. Mr. Goodwin's wound entitles him to 1. That was as close as Wolfe ever got to bedside compassion. When Fritz left, Wolfe leaned back, fingers steepled. We shall not oblige Miss Draper by retreating. Instead, we shall bait her. Meaning? We will leak, discreetly, that I have identified the debtor responsible for Lenore's death. Let me guess, I said. You want Draper to panic. Precisely. Guilt, Mr. Goodwin, like debt, compounds with interest. She will come to us before the balance devours her. I whistled. And if she sends someone else instead, say, the kind who carries a gun instead of guilt? Then, he said mildly, you will earn your beer. I grinned. Nice to feel useful again. He gave a long sigh that could have been affection if it hadn't been cloaked in exasperation. Archie, your levity is intolerable, but indispensable. I started typing up a sanitized version of Wolfe's deductions for Lon Cohen at the Gazette, the leak he wanted. The keys clacked like rain on tin, and Wolfe dictated in that rolling baritone that could turn gossip into scripture. Unconfirmed sources within the financial community suggest that a surviving witness may soon identify the instigator behind the Blue Index affair, he said. Mr. Wolfe has privately indicated that the matter involves a betrayal from within the firm's own offices. I paused. You sure that won't have the DA chewing nails? Let him, Wolfe said. The public aroma of scandal is more potent than any subpoena. When I finished, he signed it with a curt nod, the official signal that I was dismissed. But I didn't leave. You think Draper will bite? I asked. She must, he said. Her pride demands exoneration as much as her fear demands concealment. She will choose whichever arrives first. And Kramer? Kramer will bluster, raid, and find ashes. He will then curse, drink, and call me, in that order. I couldn't argue. The day outside had gone grey again, the kind of Manhattan noon where everything looks honest until you check the books. Fritz returned with the beers, their chill fogging the glasses. Wolfe took one, raised it to eye level like a judge examining evidence. To clarity, he said. I took the other and clinked it. And to debts that never balance, he almost smiled. You romanticize insolvency. Maybe, I said, but it keeps the lights on. He leaned back, content, or as close to it as Wolfe ever got. The office smelled of beer, orchids, and ink, our holy trinity. On the desk, the ledger pages lay open like wounds waiting to heal. Wolfe closed his eyes. Mr. Goodwin, note for the record, deceit is rarely free. Even when the books are burned, the balance remains. I nodded, setting my beer down. You sound like a banker with morals, that's new. Phooey, he said softly. The phone rang again. Long, insistent. I reached for it. Nero Wolfe's residence. Kramer's voice came through, weary but grimly satisfied. You were right. Draper's gone. Took a cab out of the city 20 minutes ago. We found her desk empty except for one note. The debt is paid. I looked at Wolfe. His eyes opened, calm and unreadable. Inspector, he said, you are chasing a woman who knows how to vanish. I suggest you watch the banks, not the roads. Kramer grunted. She won't get far, and when she doesn't, I'll call you. Do, Wolfe said and hung up. I exhaled. So that's it? We wait for her to go broke? Precisely, he said, lifting his beer. Every debtor returns to the ledger. He took a sip, eyes half closed. And when she does, Mr. Goodwin, we shall collect. It was close to midnight, and the brownstone was breathing like a cat pretending to sleep, too still, too quiet, waiting to pounce. Fritz had long gone to bed. The orchids upstairs were steeped in their tropical dreams, and Wolfe sat in his office chair as though carved there, immovable as a mountain with upholstery. I'd killed the lights in the front hall and taken up my post by the door, behind the curve of the frame where Wolfe's desk lamp cast just enough glow to make him visible bait. He hadn't said a word in 15 minutes, which for him meant deep contemplation. For me, it meant nerves. I whispered, You sure he'll come tonight? Yes. Wolfe's voice was velvet and steel. Mr. Cole's predicament is not one he can sleep through. His books are unbalanced, his accomplices anxious, his conscience, such as it is, agitated. The rumour I leaked will have reached him by now. Meaning he thinks you've got proof? Indeed. He sipped his beer, unhurried, as though we were waiting for a dinner guest instead of a killer. He will come to destroy it. Well, I murmured, let's hope he knocks first. He gave me one of his small, withering looks, the kind that says humour is an evolutionary defect. Then silence again. The wall clock ticked like a heartbeat that wanted attention. At 12:37, the front latch clicked. Soft, deliberate. A shadow moved through the glass of the vestibule. Wolfe didn't move, but his eyes lifted slightly toward the sound, one of those infinitesimal gestures that, in Wolfe, meant ready yourself. The knob turned. The door eased open an inch, then two. The faintest slice of streetlight brushed the parquet. I counted 3 steps, the measured tread of a man trying not to be heard. Then the glint of metal, a pistol, steady, cautious. Harold Cole stepped into the light like a man who'd practiced walking into rooms he didn't belong in. He was dressed for the part, dark overcoat, grey hat pulled low, the smell of imported tobacco trailing him like guilt. "Don't move," he said. "I rarely do," Wolfe replied. His voice was so calm it startled even me. Cole's eyes darted toward the desk, then to the safe behind it. "You've got something that belongs to me." Wolfe tilted his head. "You refer to the ledger pages, I assume." Cole's jaw tightened. "You've been playing games with my firm, stirring up the police. I came for what's mine." "I fear," Wolfe said, "that moral property cannot be reclaimed by burglary." Cole raised the gun higher. "You think this is moral philosophy? Those pages are evidence, fabricated or stolen, I don't care which. You'll hand them over or you'll shoot me?" Wolfe's tone didn't change a degree. "That would be inconvenient for you. Dead detectives are poor scapegoats." "I'm not bluffing," Cole snapped. "You've got no idea who you're dealing with." "On the contrary," Wolfe said. "You are Harold Cole, born Albany, 1895, educated inadequately, employed since 1931 at Brayton & Cole, where you've devoted your ingenuity to perfecting the art of crime under the pretense of finance. You and your partners created a shell fund, the Blue Index, through which you laundered stolen war bonds and embezzled government securities." Cole's hand twitched on the gun. "You can't prove that." "I can prove," Wolfe said smoothly, "that you ordered Richard Baird's death when he discovered your scheme, and that you permitted your secretary, Miss Draper, to dispose of the woman who knew too much, the one you called your widow." Cole's nostrils flared. "You think I killed them?" "I do not think," Wolfe said. "I know." It was artistry, the way he said it. Quiet, lethal, final. Even Cole seemed to feel it. "You talk big for a man sitting down," Cole said, trying to sneer and almost succeeding. "Standing would not improve my argument," Wolfe said. Cole stepped closer. "Where are the pages?" "In the safe behind me," Wolfe said mildly. "Would you like them?" The words hung in the air like baited wire. Cole hesitated, then took the final step forward, lowering the gun just enough to reach for the safe handle. That's when I moved. I came out from behind the door and brought the butt of my revolver down on his wrist. The gun clattered to the carpet. Before he could recover, I followed with a left hook that connected solidly with his jaw. He staggered back, hit the corner of the desk, and slumped like yesterday's stocks. Wolfe didn't flinch. "Impetuous but effective," he said. "Turn on the lights." I did. Cole was sprawled halfway to the floor, the picture of a bad investment gone under. "Congratulations," I said. "Your bait worked. You've got one broker, slightly dented." Wolfe rang the bell cord. "Fritz will fetch the police." "He'll love that at midnight," I muttered, bending to check Cole's pulse. He was out cold but breathing. By the time I'd straightened his tie to look presentable for arrest, the doorbell rang again, loud and insistent. I opened it to find Inspector Kramer on the stoop, Stebbins hulking behind him, both looking like they'd been pulled out of bed by bad news. Kramer took one look inside and groaned. I might have guessed. "Saul called. Said you had something cooking. Didn't say it'd be this." "He was correct," Wolfe said. "We have completed our experiment." Kramer's eyes narrowed at the body. "Harold Cole." "Formally," Wolfe said, "you'll find his conscience bruised but intact." Stebbins grunted, stepping around me to check Cole's gun. "Safety's off. Looks like he meant business." "He did," I said, "but business hours are over." Kramer pulled out his notepad. "Start talking, Wolfe." Wolfe gestured toward the unconscious man. Mr. Cole, having discovered that I possessed incriminating pages from his firm's ledger, chose to retrieve them personally. His effort was thwarted. "Where are those pages?" Kramer demanded. "In my safe," Wolfe said, "though not the originals." Kramer frowned. Meaning? Wolfe reached into his desk drawer, drew out a small bundle of papers and handed them over. Facsimiles, photostats I created from the genuine article before returning the originals to the courier's drop. Kramer blinked. You're telling me you've had the real ones all along? Since the courier delivered them last night, Wolfe said. I made photostats, then returned the originals to where our thief expected them not to be. Stebbins let out a low whistle. You mean you used the guy's own guilt as a fishing line? Precisely, Wolfe said. He bit. Kramer studied the papers, then looked at me. You cold-cocked him? Pure reflex, I said. Call it an instinct for self-preservation, his and mine. Wolfe leaned back in his chair, eyes half closed. Inspector, you now have your murderer, your evidence, and your explanation. Kindly remove the first, retain the second, and make of the third what you will. Kramer sighed, pulling out his cigar but not lighting it. You always have to make it sound like scripture, don't you? I have no such pretensions, Wolfe said. I merely prefer clarity. Stebbins bent to haul coal up. The broker groaned, blinking awake. When he saw the uniforms, his shoulders sagged like a man who'd finally met the bill collector. Kramer leaned in close. Cole, you've got a right to counsel, but after tonight you might need a priest. Cole glared at Wolfe. You think you've won? The firm won't fall. They'll bury it before the papers even— Phooey, Wolfe said, cutting him off. Your partners will protect themselves, not you. Debtors always do. Kramer straightened, motioned to Stebbins. Take him in. As they escorted Cole out, Kramer lingered a moment. I'll give you this, Wolfe, you delivered him clean. Wolfe inclined his head. Your efficiency is appreciated. Kramer pocketed his cigar. Yeah, well, don't make a habit of it. He turned to me. And Goodwin, next time you decide to play hero, send me a memo first. Sure, I said. I'll type it in advance. He snorted and left, the front door closing with that particular thud that means the law's satisfied for the night. For a while, there was silence again. Wolfe leaned back, folded his hands, and looked at me. Your impetuosity was, for once, useful. Thanks, I said. I'll have that engraved, maybe on a plaque for the wall. He scowled faintly. Do not. Fritz appeared, eyes wide, holding a folded towel. Inspector Kramer gone? Yes, Wolfe said. You may secure the premises. As Fritz retreated, I poured 2 beers from the tray he'd brought earlier. Wolfe accepted his with a nod. Another client dead, another killer caught, I said, and another scar for my collection. Think we're even yet? He took a slow sip. The ledger is balanced, Mr. Goodwin, for now. Until the next fool decides to make a deposit. Precisely. He gestured toward the door. Lock it. I did, then turned back. Wolfe was already easing his bulk toward the elevator. Orchids tomorrow? I asked. Of course, I grinned. Good. Gives me something to look forward to between near-death experiences. He paused halfway in the lift, looked at me with the faintest trace of warmth behind the glare. Archie, I have tolerated many things. Your wit, your insubordination, even your vocabulary. But I will not tolerate ingratitude. You remain alive. That will suffice as reward. Sure, I said. And maybe I'll live long enough to collect interest. The elevator doors closed with a soft hiss, carrying him upward toward orchids and isolation. I stood alone in the office, the smell of gun oil and spilled adrenaline still hanging in the air. The desk lamp threw long shadows over the same safe that had started the night's fireworks. I sat down at the typewriter and began the report. Title, The Brownstone Gambit. Subtitle, How to Catch a Killer Without Leaving Your Chair. Halfway through, I stopped and poured myself another beer. The city outside was starting to hum again, night giving way to something like peace. Inside, the balance sheets of life and death had evened out, at least for the moment. By the next afternoon, the brownstone had settled into the kind of hush that follows after gunfire. Not quite peace, but a truce pretending to be one. Manhattan outside was trying its best to look civilized again, car horns sounding like polite coughs, delivery trucks clattering down 35th Street with the self-importance of peacekeepers. Inside, Wolfe was at his desk, and the world, meaning me, Fritz, and an overworked typewriter, was pretending none of us had almost been perforated 12 hours earlier. The Gazette lay open across Wolfe's blotter, headline large enough to bruise egos all over Center Street, Kramer nets Wall Street killer in brilliant sting. The word brilliant had probably been inserted by Lon Cohen as an olive branch to Wolfe's sense of justice, or maybe to mine. Either way, the picture underneath showed Kramer glowering into the camera like a man allergic to credit. I came in carrying 2 envelopes, one from the DA's office, the other from Saul Panzer. Saul's handwriting was its usual cryptic scrawl, delivered as requested, no tails left breathing. That was his way of saying the last loose ends were trimmed. I tossed the note on Wolfe's desk. Saul says we can sleep again. Sleep, Wolfe muttered without looking up, a diversion for those with nothing to think about. Try it sometime, I said, taking the chair opposite. The rest of us find it therapeutic. He made a sound halfway between a sigh and a growl. Therapy implies deficiency, Mr. Goodwin. I have none. Except humility, I said. That earned me the briefest flicker of his eyes over the rim of the newspaper. Then he reached for the second envelope, the one with the district attorney's seal, and slit it open with the precision of a surgeon cutting conscience from flesh. From Mr. Skinner, he said. The district attorney extends his gratitude for our discreet cooperation and encloses assurance that your involvement in the Blue Index affair is considered entirely exculpatory. He adjusted his glasses, reading further. Mr. Goodwin's name will not appear in any official record or press release. Well, I said, leaning back, that's almost poetic. I might frame it next to my draft card. He folded the letter neatly and set it aside. Your debt, Mr. Goodwin, is cancelled. I grinned. Let's call it deferred. I never trust paperwork that nice. That cracked the faintest corner of his mouth, the Wolfe version of laughter, more a gravitational disturbance than a sound. The bell cord trembled under his hand. Fritz. Our household cavalry appeared a moment later, carrying the dinner tray. The aroma announced it first. Roast duck with orange glaze, buttered noodles, and asparagus that had been terrified into tenderness. Fritz set the tray on the side table, his eyes still sharp from a night without proper sleep. Dinner, gentlemen, he said softly, and congratulations if I may. You may, Wolfe said. Your patience has been taxed as well. Fritz smiled, bowed slightly, and disappeared like a magician who'd just concluded his final trick. I poured myself a glass of milk, one of my few vices Wolfe tolerated only because he found it incomprehensible. The cold hit the back of my throat like honesty, which was fitting for the day. Wolfe eyed it with distaste. You are aware that milk is not an appropriate accompaniment to duck. Sure, I said, but it's appropriate for a man whose blood's still running on last night's adrenaline. Phooey. He poured his own beer instead, the golden stream landing in the chilled glass with a satisfying clink. For a while neither of us spoke. The duck was perfection, the kind of meal that made you wonder if Fritz had bribed heaven for the recipe. Wolfe ate with the slow reverence of a priest performing sacrament. I, less formally, just enjoyed being alive. At length he said, You have a talent for disobedience that borders on genius, yet, inexplicably, Providence continues to favour you. That's because Providence likes a good show, I said. You, on the other hand, prefer a quiet evening with beer and moral superiority. He dabbed his lips with a napkin. Morality is a necessity for men who indulge in risk. I have chosen the safer vice. Staying put? Thinking, he said. You should attempt it. Only when the rent's due. The silence that followed wasn't tense, just companionable, like the pause between chapters of a good book. Outside, a taxi honked twice, an impatient sound from another world. Inside, the clink of cutlery and the soft hum of Fritz in the kitchen gave the scene its rhythm. Wolfe leaned back, replete. Kramer has not telephoned, which means he is gloating. He will visit tomorrow to resume his grievances. He already got the headline, I said. Let the man have his glory. He earned it, sort of. Indeed, though I confess I find it distasteful when credit is distributed according to political convenience. That's Manhattan for you. Even the angels charge retainer fees. He gave me that long, appraising look, the kind that usually means I've said something impertinent but not wrong. You are developing a vocabulary of cynicism that rivals my own. Practice, I said, and long exposure. Wolfe's hand drifted to the bell cord again, more from habit than intent. He didn't pull it. Instead, he spoke in that low, reflective tone he used only when the case was over and the world temporarily made sense. Debts. Archie, he said. They fascinate me. The civilized mind catalogues obligations as neatly as a ledger, financial, moral, emotional. Yet only one kind of debt ever seems to trouble men enough to kill for it. Guilt? He nodded. Exactly. The invisible balance between deed and reparation. Mr. Cole thought he could erase his crime with the destruction of evidence. Miss Draper imagined she could offset betrayal with confession. Both mistook arithmetic for absolution. And Lenore? I asked. She paid in full, he said softly. For a moment, even I couldn't wisecrack. The room seemed heavier for it. Not sad exactly, but aware. Wolfe finished his beer, set the glass down with the precision of ritual, and announced, I have paid enough for one man's folly. We will discuss this no further. Which in Wolfe speak meant the case was over, the ledger closed and the subject exiled to memory. I nodded. Fair enough, though next time maybe let me pick the assignments that don't involve bullets. You will do as you are told, he said, though the edge had worn off the command. Your obstinacy, however vexing, remains an asset. Thanks, I said. That's going in the scrapbook right next to useful impetuosity. He glared, but there was amusement under it. Dinner concluded the way all dinners with Wolfe should. Dessert, silence, and one final philosophical flourish. Fritz cleared the plates and replaced them with coffee for me, and another beer for Wolfe. The afternoon light slanted through the blinds, turning the office gold, a theatrical encore for a private audience of 2. I picked up the newspaper again and tapped the headline. You think Kramer actually believes he pulled that sting? Wolfe shrugged, an event roughly as common as solar eclipse. Belief, Mr. Goodwin, is an efficient anesthetic. Let him enjoy his dosage. Fair, but if the DA's office ever figures out you staged half their success, they'll send you a fruit basket. He closed his eyes. I abhor fruit baskets. I'll warn them. Another silence. Then, almost gently, he said, Archie. Yeah? You performed admirably. Rashly, of course, but admirably. You have a peculiar instinct for survival that continually defies both reason and instruction. Well, I said, someone has to balance your genius with bad judgment. Phooey. He turned his chair slightly toward the window, the profile cut against the amber light. For once, he looked less like a monument and more like a man satisfied that the world, temporarily, had aligned itself to his standards. The clock on the mantel ticked toward 8. Somewhere upstairs the orchids waited, the truest measure of Wolfe's idea of peace. He lifted his beer. To equilibrium. I raised my glass of milk. To deferred debts. We clinked. Outside, a car horn echoed down the street, and Manhattan carried on, unscrupulous, unrepentant, unending. Inside, the brownstone felt like the eye of the storm, a sanctuary made of walnut and wit. I finished the milk, set the glass aside, and leaned back. You know, I said, in this town you can owe a man cash or you can owe him your hide. You prefer the latter, as long as I stay alive to pay it. Wolfe didn't answer. He didn't have to. The quiet was answer enough, the kind that only comes after debts are settled, cases closed, and the world, for a little while, behaves.